All right, well, here we are. It's Monday morning, and our big announcement from Pastor Ben yesterday on his resignation as youth pastor, and also the board of elders and ourselves putting out the idea that we need an executive pastor as part of our pastoral team, and that we feel Ben is a great candidate for that. So what Ben and I want to do this morning is just talk through some of that whole process for you. Perhaps this will answer some questions that you have had in the last 24 hours, and just get some more to the story on this. So we're going to start with a bit of backstory. We're going to talk a little bit about how Ben came to this decision, that he was done in youth ministry at this point anyway, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the executive pastor position at the tail end of this. So we're going to start off with just hearing a bit of Ben's story. For some of you that may be newer to Gospel Chapel, you don't know that Ben has been youth pastor for 10 years now. This is his 10th year, and that's highly unusual, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
At least 20 years ago or so, the stat was around a year and a half to 2 years was the maximum for youth pastoral position, somebody filling that and then moving on either to a different position or just going out of ministry altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 years is a long time. So Ben, let's just hear a little bit about, first of all, your initial call to ministry and how God has led you into ministry and serving the church.
Sure, yeah, and I mean it's cool that we can do this, and I think it's the best way that we can kind of communicate things well when we can't get everyone in the room together to talk through things. So it feels a little bit strange in a way, but hopefully this will be helpful for everyone. Yeah, for those who haven't known me for very long or my story, I was attending Gospel Chapel growing up and going to youth group, and Chester Weeb was my youth pastor, and as I was going through youth group, I was starting to feel a call already of like, okay, I should consider youth ministry, and look into that, and then meeting with Chester on a regular basis, doing discipleship and stuff like that was something that Chester saw in me and was calling out and helping me through that a little bit. And so having mentors in my life has been huge for me. So yeah, in mid to late high school, I was really serious about getting involved into youth ministry. I went to Briarcrest, got the degree, and then it was actually just before my last year at Briarcrest that Henry Clausen called and said that there's an opening, and they're considering me. So I didn't get a hold of Gospel Chapel. They reached out to me, which was really cool, and they wanted me to apply for the youth pastor job and said finish your degree though before. So they waited a year, and Brittany Chersonoff did that last year, running the youth group while I was finishing my BA. So it was really cool that God lined up those things, and I was able to dive in the fall of 2011 in September. Shane and I were engaged at the time, and moved here and jumped in, and it was really exciting. So when I started, for me, longevity is huge. I think in ministry, if you can go now, I mean, the trends are that people are changing jobs and transitioning all the time in careers and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like in ministry, if you're able to stay for the long haul, let's say 5 years minimum,
Yeah.
or more, I think there's just so many benefits. So in my mind, in deep down, I was like, I'm going to stay here for 30 years or something like that. Like, I'm going to be the youth pastor till I retire, and I don't care what everyone else says about getting older or irrelevant in those things, because at the end of the day, I still believe this. If you have a heart for that ministry and students trust you, it doesn't matter if you are trendy or not or whatever, you can do that work. So I was thinking I'd be going the long haul past that. But I knew I did tell the elders at that time. I said, look, I want to give 10 years minimum. I think that's the minimum amount of time that you can give to actually see and look back and go, okay, what was the fruit here and the work that we did, and just to kind of set up well. So yeah, that was my jumping in. That was going, okay, let's commit to that. Shayna was into that, and we were committing to that, not knowing that would actually be the marker.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. You started year 10 in September, right?
Yeah.
So take us back to September 2020, the start of year 10.
Yeah.
You had already set kind of in your mind 10 years prior that I need to do 10 years minimum. And in September this last year, you had a clear sense that you were done in youth ministry. Just talk about that moment. Right. Take us into that moment.
Yeah. So one of the things is so I started when I was 23, and probably when I was getting closer to 30, so 5-6 years in, I was getting more and more comments from people at Gospel Chapel and outside of Gospel Chapel of going, hey, you should consider other pastoral roles. And there were some people that had that mindset of going, youth pastor work is less than a full-on associate or lead pastor. And so I fight against that.
Of course.
I think, being a youth pastor is just as much being a pastor as any other position.
Absolutely.
And that's that's a very small number of people who would say those or believe that, I think. But I think a lot of times I would take that as going, okay, you just want me to get out of this because you think that there's that I'm doing lesser work or something, right? It is kind of how I was fighting against that. And then again, people just going, look, you can't do this forever. And I go, well, watch me. But here we are. But anyway, I've seen a lot of guys just even in BC doing youth ministry well into, 40s, 50s, and even 60s. Right. So, but what I missed was, I think, in some of those conversations from people, again, mentors or others, was we see something in you that you could be using just in other roles. So that being said, as I was getting into, let's say, even the summertime, that question was happening more in my mind. Okay, well, this year 10 marker is coming. Am I doing another 5? Am I doing another 10? Like, I like to kind of plan, and you never know where things are going. But I started to think through that and go, okay, where is this all heading? And then, of course, we're in this pandemic, and certainly feeling the weight of that. But that, so originally that I told myself, okay, I'm not making any kind of decisions right now because everything's just difficult.
Yep.
I especially back in March, like a year ago now, my emotions were all over the place, and I had to really, dig deep into my relationship with the Lord, and lots of prayer, lots of walks, lots of things just to clear my head and all that kind of stuff. Once I feel like I was getting more out of that and going, okay, I'm still kind of feeling a little bit of this, what's happening next and what's stirring within me. I'm like, oh, well, I need to start thinking more about this. I need to start praying more about this and start talking to mentors again and people, and just say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Give me some feedback on this. And that was conversations mostly with people that I look up to that are outside of Grand Forks, or out of our church, I guess, and just not to freak anyone out or, wait, what do you mean you're thinking about leaving us or anything like that? So those conversations started happening, and I just started thinking more about it. When I was getting into, let's say, late September and October, that's where there was more of a definitive moment. Let's say October, somewhere in there, where I just kind of knew that this chapter was closing. And so the way I've explained it to people, and it's kind of an odd thing, but I just felt like I sat at my desk and just out of my mouth, without me even saying or controlling it, it was just like, oh, I'm done, and it wasn't from exhaustion, or it wasn't from just this like, oh, I can't do this anymore or anything. It was just like, okay, this is just a weird thing for me because for most of my life, I make the plan, I follow through with the plan,
Right.
and it's happening, and it's great.
Uh-huh.
So then that was a bit terrifying. And then from there, it wasn't a lot longer. I mean, Shane and I had some conversations, even maybe at the end of summer, going, "Hey, I'm just feeling this. I don't know where it's going." And Shayna was like, "Okay, yep, let's just keep talking about it."
Yeah.
But then it came to that moment where like, okay, I've got to tell Shayna. And so she was the
Uh-huh.
first one, and obviously, and it was kind of a scary thing, but you go and I just said, you know what, this will be my last year, and I'm finished. She went, oh, okay, cool, like great. And she took it super well, and she was just like, yeah, and I think she was even like excited for like, okay, well, let's look forward to what's next.
Right.
And that's when I started to think through, okay, what's my next steps now? Because this is completely new territory to me. Yeah. I had envisioned being the youth pastor at Gospel Chapel for even longer, or doing other things, whatever. But this wasn't how I had planned it. So it's like, okay, how do I navigate this well? So I continued to have conversations, and I continued to process that. Is that an answer?
Yeah. No, that's great. And reaching out to mentors, spending time in prayer, talking it through, a number of avenues.
And a lot of
I resonate with that story because that was me 3 years ago too. When I came to Gospel Chapel, it was again, I didn't look for it. Gospel Chapel came looking for me. I had committed to a 5-year period of time at North Valley Baptist, and I had just finished that, and I was asking the same question, okay, God, what's next? And then this transition just presented itself. So, and it's not that there was anything that I was leaving that was like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here either. There was no conflict issues. There was no this is a dead end. I don't like doing this anymore. None of that was at play. And I think that's the same thing with your story right now too, is it's just like, this is God leading us into this transition. So at that point, even, we got to November. I think it was our regular elders meeting. You had taken Tony Boschman aside. He's one of our elders at Gospel Chapel. And then the next day you sat down with myself and Rick Mose. And Rick Mose is our new treasurer. And he's also been helping us with a bunch of leadership development and staff development things at the church over this last year. And so you sat down with the two of us and kind of talked through this. What was in your mind at that point as to what is because those conversations are kind of the definitive conversations when you start talking to your senior pastor and your eldership team about resigning. Those that's a clear marker. What was in your mind at that point as far as moving forward?
So once Shane and I were convinced that this was the right move and that we were moving in this direction, there was maybe there was a bit of a process just before that of not even just talking to mentor, but even just a few close friends. Just to go, this is what we're processing, and even just to talk about, okay, what's the right timing here? Because I felt like Gospel Chapel, even starting in the fall, we were starting this momentum towards what's the future holding here for us. And I really wanted to make sure that if I knew that I was wrapping up, that you and the leadership at the church weren't making these plans with, okay, Ben is where he is doing what he's doing and so forth. I wanted to be like, okay, no, it's fair that they know as they're planning ahead where I'm at. And so that's where it came, where I knew it was time and so forth. It was like, okay, November. So Tony Boschman had been, walking closely with me for the last number of months, last spring and into the summer and then into the fall with a lot of the youth ministry stuff. And he's been meeting with me and helping me with a lot of different things. So I thought Tony's a good first step. And soon right after was with you too, just in case Tony had some big revelation of like, let's just wait a little bit before. But anyway, Tony, yeah, we had a great conversation, and I think his first kind of response was like, "Well, this is really sad, sad
Right.
news." And I didn't think that through, being like, "Oh, yeah, I guess this would be people like me, so that's good." But anyway, and then that's when I decided, okay, I should tell Doug as soon as I can. I don't need to string this too much further, especially as things were picking up with more conversations about the future.
Right.
So that's when I was like, okay, this is the morning. So I had asked a few friends, hey, this is the time I'm having the meeting. Please pray for me. And I've never resigned before from anything besides, working at Home Hardware or the Video Express. So it's like this is the first career kind of thing.
Right.
So that's when I decided, no, I need to sit down. So sitting down with you guys, again, I felt like you guys were great, and we're like, yeah, thanks so much for giving us this heads up and giving us a runway here. And again, this wasn't necessarily you or anyone else's hope that we want Ben to wrap up, like he's overstaying his welcome perhaps, or anything like that. So that's kind of what brought me to that moment.
Yeah. I'd say when I got the email, I think it was Monday night, because you wanted to meet on a Tuesday morning before our staff meeting.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw it, I went, I guess he's resigning.
Oh man. Yeah.
It was just one of those moments, but yet, I think God prepares us in this, and yeah, we had been, as elders, we've been going through the reframe stuff from Regent College about, how do you reframe your whole ministry centered on the gospel, and what is the gospel, and what's the way forward. And we've really been taking the time this last year to ask those questions, because we've kind of had space to do that.
Yeah.
And that's been really good. So yeah, all of this stuff kind of ties together, and I think the timing was really good for that. So
Yep.
But you didn't have a picture of like, I'm going to be continuing on at Gospel Chapel.
No,
in another format other than maybe volunteering.
Yeah. So that was basically what I had presented to you guys was, if I can remember correctly, it was, I know that my role right now as it is coming to an end. I want to finish out the youth year. I want to do a good job with that and make sure that I'm, fulfilling the calling and not just leaving you guys high and dry.
Right.
And still want to pursue that. And then the follow-up to that for both you and Rick, when I was talking to you and when I talked to Tony, was I don't know what's next.
Right.
And I'm not sure that Gospel Chapel is anywhere in that picture. I wasn't sure. I had a leaning that it would be elsewhere or doing something different ministry-wise. And do you want me to talk a bit about that process?
Yeah, sure.
So that was really a roller coaster, because then I went, okay, well, what does a guy who has a BA and just finished an MA in like a master's degree in youth ministry,
right?
What does he do when he's not a youth pastor? Because I didn't feel a calling of like God going, okay, I want you to be youth pastor somewhere else.
Right.
It was just time to wrap up as a youth pastor. So what do you do? And I still love youth ministry. So the first avenue was, let's explore what youth ministry would look like outside of a church,
right?
For example,
okay.
And, contacting guys like Marv Penner, who's been running this master's program, or Sid Coop, or different things like that, of going, what's out there. Shane and I haven't been all that interested in moving.
Yeah.
We love Grand Forks and we love Gospel Chapel. So in my mind, I'm like, well, wherever I'm at, I will be faithful in serving at the church still, at Gospel Chapel, in whatever capacity, if they'll still have me as I finish up this role.
Right.
So then I was just reading like tons of books and things on how to make a career change and listening to podcasts about like when you know it's time and what do you do next. And And so in my mind, I was pursuing like a ministry thing. I was also open to being like, well, what if I became a school teacher? What if I, go work at the mill just for a season or whatever, and just maybe almost have a sabbatical in that sense of going to do something different. And then through that process, it was clear. And I mean, Shayna's funny this way because she knows things before I do.
Right.
And,
our wives often do.
Right. And she was like, no, I don't foresee that happening. You're going to still be in ministry. I went, oh,
right.
Okay. And then I slowly came around eventually, finally, and figured it out. And that felt like, okay, yeah, no, God still wants me involved in ministry. And then I can't remember the exact dates around this, but because I'd go for a walk every single night. I'd pray, I'd listen to things, and all that kind of stuff. And it struck me, the Lord speaking to me, going, "I'm not done with you as a pastor yet."
Right.
So I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's really interesting."
Yeah.
And then slowly working that in me to go, okay, well, what would it look like if there's a future for me at Gospel Chapel? And let's explore that a little bit. And that's where conversations started happening more with you,
Yep.
with the elders, as they were already planning a vision for the future for the church. And I was maybe dismissing it a little bit quickly to go, no, it's time for me to take
Right.
a break, maybe. And then it kind of all circled back around to go, okay, if my role is completely finished as it is now, what could the future look like? And that's where more conversations started to happen around that.
Yeah, and I think that was around January.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to transition into that now. So like we hit February, and your resignation came to our regular elders meeting on the 8th, I believe it was, and so Tony and myself were in the know on that.
Right.
The rest of the elders, they had to catch up at that point.
Yeah.
And now the whole congregation's having to catch up on this.
Right.
And this is one of the interesting challenges in leadership when you're leading an organization, is as leaders you're talking through and you're working through changes that need to happen, and maybe it's months and months of background processing that's happening in our hearts and lives and in our conversation as leaders. And so it may seem sudden to the church, but it's not sudden in our minds. And I think one of the challenges for us as leaders is to then allow the congregation time to process, because we've had months and months to process this.
Sure. Well, and then I've had
even longer,
kind of end of summer. Yeah. This has been a wrestling for me.
Yeah. So that's kind of the backstory on Ben stepping down as youth minister, and now we're going to kind of transition into talking about the executive pastor position. All right, so this whole idea of the executive pastor and another pastoral position, because we definitely need to continue with youth ministry.
Yeah.
That's something that Gospel Chapel has been known for. It's one of it doesn't say it on our core values statement in the foyer, but I think it's a core value of Gospel Chapel that we provide significant ministry for children and youth in the Grand Forks and Boundary region. So, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but we're talking then really about creating a new staff position at Gospel Chapel that we've never had before.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about where this came from.
Right.
And if I remember right, you and I got together at Kokomo's, at the coffee shop that is no more.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. The first week of January, 3 years ago, during my candidating week. And one of the questions that I think I asked at that point was, who do you think the new, is there room for a third pastor? Because I'm looking at Gospel Chapel. I'm looking at the list of ministries that are going on, the complexity. You may not realize this, but Gospel Chapel is a busy, busy church. Like numerous ministries going on most evenings and during the day. Yeah. And just pastoral oversight and equipping and leadership training, things like that. My question was, are we going to be looking for a third pastor down the line? And I think you indicated that that's something that has been in discussion in the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is when you have a church a certain size, and it made sense to have the senior pastor, and then the youth pastor, because that's been such a focus for Gospel Chapel. But then the natural thing to do is to go, okay, what can that youth pastor do outside of the work that needs to happen there to help in an associate way? Excuse me. So the really cool thing, the advantage that I've had in the last 10 years, apart from my peers in youth ministry, is I preach way more than most youth pastors do. I've done weddings, funerals, and then just got, to be right in the second chair in a lot of ways to Henry Clausen and now to you, where I'm learning from you in a lot of different ways, which is great. So it's a huge advantage that I've been able to have that some other guys maybe don't.
Right.
But yeah, when the church grows and when you start looking at functions, and I think we've just seen even more, let's say in the last 5 years, 4 years, more and more people are moving to Grand Forks, and there's more people coming to our church and stuff. You just start those conversations of like, okay, well, what could be, and does it make sense? Does it make sense to have a lead, a full, if you want to say associate position or something there, and then a full-on youth pastor to meet that? And that was something, I mean, you had mentioned that to me when we first started chatting. I went, oh wow, what a cool idea, like I think sometimes we limit ourselves from history, and then also just money stuff, right? You go, oh wow, sounds great, why don't we hire 5 more pastors, Doug? Sure, why not? And it's like, okay, well, let's be careful here and actually discern where the Lord is leading us and taking us in those ways. So those conversations were happening a number of times. And then I think, like you said, when all this has been happening, you kind of get a chance to put everything on the table and evaluate. And in that process, for me, just personally doing that, but then you and the elders also starting to do more of that and having those conversations, I feel like it all kind of collided at the same time. So without even any of us kind of knowing it, going, okay, you guys are thinking one way, I'm thinking one way. Wait, let's put it all on the table and see what that looks like, and then kind of figure those things out. I know I lost my train of thought there, but
well, I think what we've come to especially over the last year, is that partly this is just kind of I guess a product of time of us working together, me now being here in my 3rd year at the church. And it's not just necessarily the whole COVID situation that's created this, but I think it's allowed us to hone in on
that's true
certain things. And one of those things is simply, what is our ministry capacity? Not just as a church, but even myself and yourself, our staff. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Where do we excel? What energizes us about our work? What drains us? And how can we help each other in all of that, so that we can, one, expand our ministry capacity, do how God has wired us to do ministry, and then also identify some of the gaps that we currently have in our ministry. And in the last few months, Ben and I have been listening to a lot of the same podcasts by Kerry Newhoff, and we came across this one where he was talking with Patrick Lencioni about this thing called the working genius, and this idea that each of us has a kind of a sweet spot for where when we're working in this mode, this is how God's wired us to work. We can do other things, but for a time, and then there's things that just drain us, we don't do well, that we struggle with. He calls it the working genius, is kind of that's your wheelhouse. The working competencies, things you can do, but if you don't have to, that's great. And then there's the working frustrations, those things that burn you out, that drag you down, that sometimes you just don't know how to navigate it either. You just don't have the skill set, the mindset to do that. And so there was this online tool that helped us kind of discern that. We've done that as a complete staff now. So I think one of the neat things for people to know here is that we are opposites on that whole scale.
Yeah, that was funny.
So, and that was interesting because we had been talking about, well, how do we work best together? And, my working geniuses are wonder and inventiveness, the visionary part, the dreaming about tomorrow. And Ben, your 2 top working geniuses were?
The galvanizing. And now I can't remember what the other
enablement.
One was. Enablement, that's right.
Yeah.
Not discernment. Enablement.
And what are those things for you when you saw that result come in? What did that kind of confirm for you? Or
so I think with those, I mean, there's a level of just like, okay, let's just get things done. Let's start moving and make things happen. And I think I do well at that. I can also rally people, like kind of that enablement piece where I go, okay, you have these skills. I want to set you up for success. Let's get that going. And how can I help you do that? How can I encourage you and set you up well? And so I think that's where there's a good teamwork piece for you and I, where I don't necessarily want to go sit down and come up with all these ideas of what could be necessarily. It's not my working frustration, I don't think, but it would be a, let's think about things. And I mean, this year I've had to do 700 different youth ministry ideas because things just keep switching on us, right?
Yeah.
And that is running me to the ground, but I can do it, but I would rather have a plan. Okay, great. The plan is there. Now I'm really good at setting it up to make it happen. Here's the steps, and here's what we're going to do, and how can we go back to see if we're on task or not, and those kind of things. So that came up, which is, I think, the interesting point you're making was it was like the elders had this like maybe vision idea or even list of, well, if there's another pastor, here's maybe what it would look like. Right. And I started working on like, okay, just without anyone knowing, I think even yourself going, okay, well, what other pastoral role would I do? And I kind of just wrote out some of my ideas, initially in a journal, and then they kind of all came together, and it went, wait a second, your list is matching my list. Like that's kind of cool. And kind of going into that, which is the job description public, like that was written up.
It's on our website. If you go to gospelchapelgf.com, it's right underneath our COVID protocols and guidelines. Second thing down. Executive pastor position description.
So then that gives a really good, without going, I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but that gives a good overview of maybe how those things kind of came together. But.
Yeah, and where Ben is really strong, I'm weak, and those are my working frustrations. So like I've had a lot of great ideas, but then I hit a bit of a brick wall when it comes to getting implementation, and Ben's really good at the implementation piece. And I think Ed Trainer in yesterday's announcement made the point that one, we want to be able to enhance our capacity for pastoral care of the congregation, and that's also something you do really well that I often just miss. My calling, and this goes back to even the first interviews I did, even prior to my candidating week. It was really clear that what the church was looking for was strong teaching and preaching and vision for the future of where the church should go.
Right.
And those were the specific things that they called me to do.
Yeah.
Now, I was told you need to pour a lot of your time and energy into this. Well, that means there's time and energy not going to other things.
Sure.
That people when they expect of a pastor, especially when you've had a long-term 20-year pastorate where Henry was really good at the pastoral care piece. He's really good at the relational piece. I mean, him and Judy are in the community. They're getting together with people. That is that's his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
That's not my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And so after 20 years of that, having somebody come in and you say, we need good, strong teaching and somebody who's a visionary. But then there's this hole that's been left too.
Sure.
And I think people have really felt that, especially this last year.
Yeah.
But and so part of this is addressing that that we know that there's ministry gaps in our team at Gospel Chapel.
Yeah.
And we feel that this is one way we can not plug those holes. I don't want to make it sound so negative or utilitarian.
Yeah.
But we know that those kind of ministries need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing when you ask if we have, let's say, the number is 300 people in our congregation, if you were to ask them, okay, write out what you think a pastor should do,
right,
or who they should be, or whatever, you're going to get a lot of different opinions.
Absolutely.
Not to say that they would be wrong, but if you have one pastor to do the visionary, the preaching, the teaching, the pastoral care, and on, is it realistic? And especially as more and more, I think that's the thing, is as soon as the church keeps growing, which we want to see happen because we want to reach more and more people for Jesus and the gospel.
Absolutely.
So we want to see more people, whatever, connecting to churches or connecting to our church. How much can someone achieve with that. And I think, my favorite author and pastor, preacher, speaker is Eugene Peterson. I mean, he kind of talked about the 150. Like,
right.
he felt like after 150 people, he couldn't do that good shepherding care. I think maybe 200, but and that's something that you and I can share that load a little bit better, perhaps, and certainly something I would love to focus on with the bulk of my time is caring for people, make sure they're connected, make sure they're welcomed at the church, and those kind of things. So
so I think a question that people may have, going into this and considering all of this, because it's a lot to take and a lot to kind of process in, and we're asking them to do it in a month. Where we've had like 6-8 months of processing time and thinking through this, and we're asking our congregation to in some ways fast track it in a month and to process all this. So that's why we're trying to give you a lot of information on this. But are we doing this just to keep Ben around? Or are we doing this because we really feel that this is a position we need in the church?
Right.
And my answer to that, and I believe our elders' answer to that, is this is a position we need, regardless of whether Ben fills it or not.
Yeah.
And so, we're kind of asking for two things to be, there's kind of two things, and maybe this will come out as two things on the ballot when we take the vote is, the approval of the executive pastor position description.
Yeah.
And that we establish that as a position for our staff at Gospel Chapel.
Right.
And two, that we're calling Ben to fill that role.
Sure.
We almost need to separate those two things.
Sure.
But we are doing it at the same time, so it is. I know it's a lot to kind of throw on everybody's plate, but I think it just fits.
Yeah.
It fits who you are, and we didn't write a job description that wouldn't fit somebody else.
Right.
Like there's other guys out there that could do this job. This isn't that we didn't custom tailor a position description just to fit Ben.
Yeah.
We knew we needed this position. We came up with a job description. You and I batted this back and forth for the last, I don't know, it started I think in February. Well, that was just yesterday. Started in January. It feels like a long time.
That's right.
This has been quite a process. But we've been batting this back and forth, and we've been contacting other executive pastors who have helped us kind of go, okay, well, this is what my position really looks like. This is how I interact with my lead pastor.
Yeah.
And we've taken a lot of counsel from those, and it's really helped us kind of flesh out what we were already thinking. It's just that these guys are way ahead of us on this because they're already doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, at the end of the day, I want to say this right, but at the end of the day, or I'll put it this way, my hands are just, I want to be wide open. So my hands are open. I'm still discerning lots and just trying to get guidance from the Lord. And one of those steps is just to hear from people.
Right.
I want to hear, like someone had asked, like outside of our church, but just said, well, why can't you just transition? Like, the congregation doesn't necessarily have to vote or whatever. I think they do. But even if they didn't, let's just say that we can just do this if we wanted to.
Right.
I would sooner actually hear from everybody in the church.
Right.
I would rather know where everyone's at with it and hear from people, because the more people that are actually discerning and praying, gives us a better future,
right?
Because
absolutely,
and just sets us up well. So my hope through all of this is that if we truly believe that I am not a good fit in that spot, I don't think there was many people who, after I finished Briarcrest and was coming in, there wasn't a lot of people that went, Ben shouldn't be a youth pastor. Like, people were pretty confident about that, which was really cool, and especially because there was some mentoring and calling and so forth. If that's not the case now, though, then we're in trouble going forward. So I just want to say that in the right sense, that I think I want to be open to it, and don't feel pressured anyway. We want to hear from you and how you have heard from the Lord, and don't go, especially it's like, oh, I really like Ben. Is he going to be homeless if he doesn't get this? Because then I'll vote yes. It's like, no, I'll be okay. Things will be fine. God will have something else for me.
Right.
But that being said too, I would love to do this,
right.
And I'll be excited and stoked to fill a role like this and to jump in. And I think there's a lot of benefits for sure. So
Yeah. So I guess one of the questions and one of the things we put out there is that, we believe this position is something we need to move the mission of the church forward.
Right.
So let's touch on that briefly. I mean, we don't have we don't have anything in writing from the Lord that, when you establish this position, I will give you X number of people and you'll be running
Right.
multiple services and locations and it's not going to bring automatic growth. But as we look at it, how do you feel that transitioning into this position will help us as a church fulfill what God has for us in the Boundary region?
Yeah. So I think one of the big hopes and desires on my end would be more and more people just at Gospel Chapel, whether you've been here for a long time or if you're new, you'll feel welcomed, you'll feel joy, love, and that you're in like that, like a thriving community and feel cared for and loved for. And I think that a lot of that's happening already.
Yeah.
But I would love to keep pressing into that.
Mm-hmm.
And alongside with that, then I can see just great potential for more and more people in our community. Let's just say Grand Forks right here. I mean, obviously there's Christian Lake and Greenwood that are also part of our family too. So maybe I should just include all of them, but that they'll be more and more people going, man, I want in that, that life that's abundant, you know, and I want in on knowing Jesus and more people coming to know Jesus. I mean, that would be a priority for me in this role too, is how are we helping and equipping people even just in our church to do that.
Right.
And part of that is that pastoral care and that shepherding, I think is a big win for that. Next to that is I think helping people be discipled within our church and leadership training and helping our ministries be fluid and working well together, those kind of things. Again, we're set up really well, I think, at Gospel Chapel in many ways for all of this. Yeah. We just want to keep taking it to the next level, let's say. Yeah. And thriving in that, which I'd be really excited to see happen. And then just some, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just part of it too, but where I can maybe help just give structure, you know, and okay, let's tighten up a few areas. Let's say paperwork wise, even, you know, of like the boring stuff where it's like, okay, Doug, don't sit down for 20 hours this week and go through policy stuff. Sit down for 20 hours this week and work on your sermon. Right. I'll sit down. It would be 20 hours, but I'll sit down and
sometimes it is.
Sure. But you know, if it's me in the future, it wouldn't take that much time in a week, but you know, sitting down and just going through that, all for the sake of helping propel and move everything else forward, for, you know, not just because, well, we need to write more things and have more manuals or books, or, you know, that's a waste of time. Yeah, we need to simplify some of that stuff, but also pull it together. Kind of a word picture that I've kind of had the last week as I've mulled over this is like all of our ministries do great things, but they're all kind of like balloons with strings hanging in a room. Sure. And what the executive pastor role does is he collects all those strings so we have a balloon bouquet. Sure. Like they're all together, they're all pulling in the same direction now rather than floating around doing their own thing. Yep. You know, and that's not to micromanage our ministries, but that's just to unify them. What is our vision for how God wants to use Gospel Chapel going forward in and through all of the ministry efforts we have? Yeah. Yeah, if a leader is volunteering and running a ministry in the church, they should feel completely 100% supported. They should feel set up well, that they know what's going on, you know, that they're not on their own, all those kind of things, which I think we can certainly help with. Yeah. And I mean, again, so many people that run in our ministries in our church are doing fantastic and all that kind of stuff. It's just a matter of taking it to the next level of helping leaders lead, I guess. Right. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's, I think that's all we need to kind of cover today. I know there's going to be more questions. We're probably going to be getting emails and phone calls and who knows what in this next 3 weeks. And we encourage you to do that. But more than anything, we just want to, again, emphasize that this, you know, from March 1st to 22nd is really a season of prayer. We want you to be praying for Ben, myself, the elders. Pray for the mission, the vision of our church, that we would have unity in that we would
that we would come to this question even with a real strong sense of unity and purpose and focus for where God wants to take us in the coming years. And so, a season of discernment over the next 3 weeks, and then we're opening up for voting for our members to come into the office during office hours, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8:30 to 3:30, and we'll have ballots in the office there and a box. You put that in, and then on the 23rd, we'll have our scrutineers, which I believe is the finance team. They'll count up those ballots, and we'll let you know where we stand on this. So thanks, Ben, for taking the time, giving us some of the backstory on how you've come to this decision to step down from youth ministry and then engage in this moving forward with Gospel Chapel in the role of executive pastor. So thanks for watching, and again, just continue to pray. And we're looking forward for what God is going to do in and through us as his people in the coming days. So thanks, and we'll see you Sunday.